My name is Silas Maddox, and for over a decade, I was the invisible hand steering millions through the volatile tides of finance. I wasn't the face on the website, not the man shaking hands at the galas or splashing headlines in Forbes, but I was the architect behind the numbers, the strategist who made sure investors slept well at night. I worked at Heartwell & Company, a boutique asset management firm tucked into the glossy skyline of Chicago's financial district. From the outside, we were sleek, sharp, respectable. From the inside, well, that's a different story. There's something about working quietly, year after year, that makes you fade into the background. People stop noticing what you carry on your back, and worse, they forget to reward the weight you shoulder. And that's exactly how I ended up sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor, watching Eli Chambers, our CFO, soak up applause that should have landed on me. "Impressive quarter, Eli," one of our biggest investors smiled, leaning back in his leather chair. "You've really steered the ship well." Eli smiled wide, his designer cufflinks glinting under the recessed lighting. "Couldn't have done it without my team," he said with a small nod toward me. But the way he said it, like I was just another cog in the machine, not the guy who pulled the strings that made the engine hum. I held my tongue like I always did, smiled, nodded. I knew the rules of this game. You don't call out your boss in front of investors, not if you want to keep your seat at the table. But in that moment, as I looked down at my notes, the ones I'd prepared for weeks, it hit me harder than usual. I was never going to get the credit. Not here. Later that afternoon, after the meeting adjourned and the investors filed out, Eli walked over to my desk with that practiced smirk he wore when he thought he was doing me a favor. "Hey, great job back there," he said, tapping my shoulder like I was some junior analyst fresh out of grad school. "You've got a real gift with the numbers." "Thanks," I replied, keeping my voice even. "You too," Eli chuckled, not catching the edge beneath my words or maybe pretending not to. "Drinks tonight at the Griffin. Investors loved the presentation. Good to keep the momentum going." I shook my head. "Got plans?" Truth? I had no plans. But the thought of watching Eli spin stories over overpriced whiskey made me nauseous. When he walked away, my phone buzzed. A text from Lena, our compliance officer. "Lena, you okay?" That meeting was rough. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. Me, same as always, invisible. Later that night, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights, a bourbon in hand, the hum of traffic below. The numbers from the last quarter looped through my mind, each figure a reminder of the value I'd built for Hartwell. $12.3 million. That's how much I'd brought in from new investor portfolios this year alone. I knew those accounts better than I knew my own reflection. Yet, every time I asked for a raise, for acknowledgement, I was met with the same script. "Market's unstable, Silas. Let's revisit next quarter." Next quarter never came. I remembered last year when I asked Eli for a 15% bonus bump. He smiled and told me, "We're all tightening belts right now." Then bought a penthouse in Lincoln Park. The weight of that hypocrisy settled into my chest as I swirled the bourbon. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calculating. If they wanted to ignore my worth, fine. But someday soon, I'd remind them exactly who was behind the curtain. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice to do it. The next morning, I walked into the office with a practiced smile and a cardboard cup of gas station coffee, lukewarm, bitter, but familiar. The kind of coffee that kept you grounded, reminded you that no matter how high the deals climbed, some things stayed real. Like integrity, like the numbers. At least that's what I believed. But beliefs can be dangerous things in the wrong company. I dropped into my chair at the far end of the open floor plan. Close enough to hear the hum of the others, but always a little outside their circles. That's how Eli kept it. His corner office was glass-walled and pristine, but it may as well have been a fortress. He could see everything, control everything, and for years, I let him. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard as the system booted up. The quarterly report draft blinked on screen, rows of numbers, projections, growth models, all mine, all honest. I leaned back, sipping the coffee, eyes drifting toward Eli's office. The door was open, but he wasn't there yet. Just his assistant, Kendra, adjusting the blinds like they mattered. Her eyes flicked to me, then quickly away like everyone else's had been doing lately. I tapped into the back-end financials again, tracing the revenue streams from our top 3 investors. The ledger matched the last version I'd run. Clean, precise, except for a gap, a small one, hidden deep beneath layered accounts. A fraction of a percentage skimmed from each quarterly return, just enough to go unnoticed but consistent across multiple reports. My brow furrowed. This wasn't a rounding error. I clicked through archived statements, my pulse quickening. The same pattern, consistent, subtle, like someone had laid a faint trail expecting no one to follow. And I wouldn't have if I hadn't been desperate for answers. The door behind me clicked shut. I glanced up. Eli stood over my shoulder, too close for comfort, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Burning the midnight oil again, Maddox?" His voice was light, casual, but the way his hand rested on the back of my chair, heavy. "Just making sure the numbers line up for the investor call." I forced a smile, minimized the ledger. "Don't want any surprises." His gaze lingered on the screen a beat too long. "Good man. You always keep things tight." I nodded, heart thudding. "Of course." Eli clapped me on the shoulder, the way someone might pat a loyal dog. "Investor confidence is everything. If they believe in the story, the numbers tell themselves." His words sat wrong with me, but I let them pass. He walked off, leaving a faint scent of expensive cologne and arrogance. I reopened the ledger the second he was gone, copying the suspicious entries onto a flash drive tucked inside my desk drawer. Just in case, because I knew better than to confront a man like Eli Voss without receipts. I spent the rest of the day watching him through the glass, watching the easy smile he gave investors, the way he waved off questions with charm and confidence. Watching as Lena, my wife, stopped by his office, laughing at something he'd said. A familiar chill crept down my spine. I shook it off. Paranoia wasn't helpful here. Later, after everyone else had trickled out, I stayed. I pulled up the payroll records, cross-referencing bonuses. The pattern was clearer now. A diversion of funds, not only from profits, but also from the bonus pool, mine specifically. The money I'd earned securing the largest accounts was being funneled somewhere else, somewhere close. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. I packed up slowly, the flash drive heavy in my pocket. On my way out, I passed by Eli's office one more time. The lights were off, the room empty. But his laptop sat open on the desk, unlocked. I shouldn't have, but I did. One quick glance revealed more than I expected. A series of flagged emails between Eli and Lena, not explicitly damning but familiar. Too familiar. Late-night dinners after board meetings, conversations about handling Silas. My stomach twisted. I left the office with the drive burning a hole in my pocket, and my mind racing faster than the city traffic outside. Ever caught someone lying to your face while smiling? Sometimes it's the smallest cracks that bring down the whole facade. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The hum of betrayal sat in my chest like a second heartbeat, too loud to ignore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eli's smirk, heard Lena's laughter behind his glass door. The numbers on the ledger had been one thing, but those emails, they cracked something deeper. At sunrise, I found myself staring out at the skyline, coffee in hand, no appetite for it. The city felt indifferent, it always did, but inside me everything was shifting. I needed confirmation. That morning, instead of heading straight to the office, I drove to a place I hadn't been in years, a small cafe tucked into a side street downtown, neutral ground. The kind of place that served burnt toast and decent eggs, but, more importantly, where I wouldn't run into anyone from work. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd use again. "Silas?" The voice on the other end sounded wary but familiar. Carter Bloom, my old colleague from a firm I left behind years ago. He specialized in forensic accounting now, working with law enforcement and private clients. The guy could sniff out financial fraud in a haystack. "I need a favor," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. "Off the record," Carter sighed. "You always did know how to lead with charm. What's the situation?" I gave him the broad strokes, the discrepancies in the ledger, the emails. I didn't mention Lena, not yet. I needed hard evidence before I admitted what I was afraid to believe. "I need to know how deep this goes, Carter. I've got a flash drive with data. Can you look at it?" There was a pause. "I'll meet you in an hour." Back at the office, Eli was in full performance mode, schmoozing the investors, flashing that polished grin. I watched from my desk, the flash drive tucked safely in my pocket. "Silas," Lena's voice startled me. She stood by my desk, hair pulled back neatly, that familiar scent of her perfume drifting between us. "Dinner tonight?" I hesitated, my face a mask. "Can't. Work's piling up." She studied me for a moment longer than necessary. "You sure everything's okay?" "Everything's fine." The lie tasted bitter. but I needed to know more before I played my hand. Carter met me outside the cafe, wearing that same rumpled jacket he always had. He slid into the booth across from me and booted up his laptop. I handed over the drive. "You trust me with this?" he asked, half smirking. "If I didn't, I wouldn't be here." Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the clatter of dishes and Carter's occasional muttering. He clicked, scrolled, then clicked again. "Silas," he finally said, leaning back, "this isn't just a skim off the top. He's been funneling profits into a shell company, overseas accounts. Some of these transfers are masked as vendor payments, very clean work, but not flawless." I felt my jaw tighten. "How much?" Carter typed a few quick commands, scanning through columns of data. "North of $2 million over the last 18 months, he said, his voice low. "And that's conservative." I swallowed hard. I'd been scraping by on modest bonuses, believing every excuse Eli gave. "He's bleeding the company dry. And laundering it," Carter added. "If this went public—" I didn't need him to finish. The scandal would tank the firm. Investors would scatter. Eli wouldn't just lose his position. He'd face criminal charges. I leaned back in the booth, trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal, the arrogance. Eli knew I'd never dig this deep. He thought I'd play my role forever. Not anymore. Carter closed the laptop and slid it back into his bag. "So, what's your move?" I stared out the window as the city moved around me, detached. "I'm not sure yet. But I knew this. I wasn't going to run. Not this time. Ever felt the ground shift beneath you and knew there was no going back? Sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering the truth. It's deciding what to do with it. The thing about finance is that the numbers always tell a story. Sometimes that story is about growth, about potential. But more often, if you dig deep enough, it's about deception." I sat at my home office desk, the soft hum of the city outside my window, barely registering. The quarterly reports from Halcyon Partners were spread out in front of me, pristine spreadsheets, well-crafted graphs. At first glance, everything seemed in order, just like Eli would want it to. But I knew better. I knew how easy it was to hide money in the shadows of percentages and projections. The day after my raise was denied, I requested access to internal financial reports. I framed it as prepping for an upcoming investor pitch, which Eli had happily endorsed. "Show them how solid we are, Silas," he'd said with that self-satisfied grin. What he didn't realize was that I was looking for cracks, and I found one. It started small, a discrepancy in a project valuation for one of our largest clients, Orion Ventures. The projections showed a modest 8% growth in assets under management, but the actual returns suggested closer to 15%. Anomalies like that don't happen by accident. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the realization pressing down on my chest. Either someone was cooking the books, or Eli had been skimming profits before the final numbers were locked. I needed more. "You've been burning the midnight oil," I jumped at the sound of Dana's voice. She stood in my office doorway holding 2 coffees. "I figured you'd still be here," she said, stepping inside. "You looked like hell this morning." I gave her a tired smile. "Appreciate the honesty." She set the coffee down in front of me, scanning the spreadsheets on my screen. "What are you digging into?" I hesitated. Dana and I weren't exactly friends, but she was sharp, one of the few people at Halcyon I trusted. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Something's not adding up. The Orion projections are off, way off." Her eyes narrowed. "How far?" "Enough that either someone's hiding money or they're just really bad at math." Dana crossed her arms, lips pressed into a line. "You think Eli's involved?" I didn't answer. The silence between us was enough. "I knew something was wrong," she said after a moment. "Last month, Eli was pushing me to backdate some compliance reports. Said it was just to keep everything aligned with investor expectations." "Did you do it?" I asked. She shook her head. "Told him no, but I didn't think much of it. Figured he'd just twist someone else's arm." A sick knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a miscalculation, this was a pattern. "Can you help me pull the raw data from the Orion accounts?" I asked. Dana hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get what I can, but if Eli catches wind of this—" "I know." It took us 3 days. 3 days of combing through archived data, back-channeling requests through Halcyon's labyrinth of internal systems. But by the end of it, we had what we needed. $4.2 million. That's how much profit Eli had diverted. Year over year, skimming just enough from Halcyon's largest accounts to funnel into off-book holdings. It wasn't enough to raise alarms with auditors, but it was enough to build himself a quiet fortune. I stared at the final report Dana compiled, my heart pounding. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. 3 years, maybe longer. I rubbed my eyes. I was too focused on bringing in deals. I didn't pay attention to what happened after the contracts closed. Dana leaned in. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. The weight of the decision settled in my chest. Taking this to HR wouldn't work. Eli had too much control, too many allies. And going to the authorities? I'd be collateral damage. "I need to talk to the investors," I said finally. "Let them see what's really going on." Dana's eyes widened. "That's dangerous." "Not as dangerous as doing nothing." The next morning I made a list. 7 names. The top investors whose portfolios Eli had been manipulating. Men and women with serious capital. People who wouldn't take kindly to being played. I'd spent years building those relationships, shaking their hands, earning their trust. Now I'd need to cash in every bit of that goodwill. I called the first one, Martin Creed, head of Creed Capital. "Silas Maddox," he greeted warmly. "Good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I need to meet with you, privately. It's about your Halcyon accounts." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "Is this about performance?" "Not exactly, but I think you'll want to hear it." One by one I made the calls. By the end of the day I had 3 meetings lined up, each one uneasy, but curious. I wasn't offering proof yet, just enough to plant the seed. By Friday I sat across from Martin Creed in a private room at his firm's downtown office. I laid out the numbers, the discrepancies, the transfers Eli had hidden. Martin's expression darkened as he flipped through the pages. "You're telling me Eli's been stealing from us?" I met his gaze evenly. "I'm telling you the numbers don't lie." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This could get messy." "I know." Martin closed the folder slowly. "Keep me informed. If this holds up, Halcyon won't know what hit them." The first move came on a rainy Thursday morning, the kind where the sky feels heavy enough to bury every decision you've ever made. I was standing at my kitchen counter nursing a black coffee gone lukewarm when Dana's name lit up my phone. "Morning," I answered, trying to sound like I hadn't been staring into nothing for the past hour. "You ready?" she asked, skipping any preamble. Dana never wasted time on niceties when things were serious. "As I'll ever be." "I've been digging deeper. Remember those wire transfers I mentioned last week? The ones routed through 3 different shell companies?" I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "Yeah. I traced them back to a private account under Eli's wife's name, Cayman Islands." Silence stretched between us, thick and sharp. "Silas," she pressed, "it's not just pocketing bonuses. He's laundering profits offshore." My grip tightened on the ceramic mug until I felt the cracks starting beneath my thumb. This was worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't just greed, it was fraud at a level that could ruin everyone tied to the firm. Dana lowered her voice as if the walls could hear her. "If this gets out the wrong way, it won't just take Eli down. The whole firm could collapse." I swallowed hard. "Then we make sure it gets out the right way." That night, I met with 2 of the firm's biggest investors, Jacob Stein and Evelyn Pierce. We gathered in the back room of an old steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where deals were made over blood-red wine and dry-aged beef. I laid it out for them, Eli's manipulation, the offshore accounts, the siphoning of their returns. Evelyn leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing. "How long have you known about this?" "Not long," I admitted, "but I've got proof, and I've kept it quiet until now because I knew we'd need to approach this carefully." Jacob, older and quieter, ran a hand over his thinning hair. "If this gets out publicly, the SEC will tear the firm apart. We'll lose everything." "That's why I came to you first," I said. "We need to force Eli out before this explodes." Evelyn sat back, arms crossed. "You think he'll just step down?" I shook my head. "No, but we don't need him to step down willingly. We need to box him in." For the next week, I worked with Dana and the investors, building a quiet storm. Dana secured a third-party audit team, discreet, loyal to the truth, not the firm. Evelyn and Jacob began whispering to other major stakeholders, planting seeds of doubt, raising questions that demanded answers Eli couldn't provide. I kept showing up to the office like nothing was amiss, exchanging polite nods with Eli across the conference room, pretending I didn't know his empire was rotting beneath him. But behind closed doors, the cracks were widening. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, Eli appeared at my door. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Silas," he said smoothly, "how about dinner tomorrow? Just the 2 of us." I paused, watching him like I might watch a cornered animal, curious if he'd bite or run. Sure, I replied, matching his tone. Sounds good. The following night, we sat at a high-rise restaurant overlooking the city skyline. Eli ordered an expensive bottle of wine and leaned back, trying to play the relaxed mentor. I know you've been restless, he began, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. And I know I haven't always shown my appreciation. I said nothing, letting him fill the silence with his own words. I've been thinking, he continued, there might be an opening for you, a partnership maybe. You've earned it. The gall of him, trying to buy my silence with the very thing he'd denied me for years. Generous, I said softly, but I'm not sure that's enough. Eli's smile faltered. Enough for what? To make me forget, I replied, leaning in, about the Cayman accounts, about the offshore laundering. For the first time in our years working together, Eli's mask cracked, his glass stilled midair, eyes narrowing. I don't know what you think you've found. I know exactly what I've found. My voice was steady, measured. And so do Evelyn and Jacob. So do several others now. Eli set the glass down, hard enough that the wine sloshed. You're making a mistake. Am I? I asked, standing, or have you? I walked away without waiting for his response. The days following my confrontation with Eli felt like the stillness before a hurricane. On the surface, everything remained polite, measured, but beneath it, the storm gathered. Eli stopped making eye contact in meetings. His usual grandstanding softened, replaced with thin-lipped smiles and clipped words. But the real sign came when an internal memo went out, an impromptu audit of the finance department scheduled immediately. It was a power play. Eli trying to sniff out how deep my investigation had gone, masking it as company policy. But I was ready. Dana and I had made sure to keep everything off the internal servers. Paper trails only existed where we wanted them to. The real proof, the offshore transfers, the shadow entities, all secured off-site, encrypted 6 ways to Sunday. He wouldn't find a thing. Still, the tension inside the office tightened. Whispers followed me down hallways. I caught glances exchanged between colleagues, some sympathetic, others wary, unsure who'd come out on top. Evelyn and Jacob, meanwhile, kept applying pressure from the outside, pushing for a board meeting, demanding transparency. They knew Eli wouldn't go quietly. And then it happened. Late one night, after most had gone home, I got a call from Dana. Her voice was tight. Silas, you need to get down here. Now. I found her in the records room, a cramped space stuffed with file cabinets that smelled faintly of old paper and toner. She stood over one drawer, her hands trembling slightly. They wiped it, she whispered. I frowned, stepping closer. The drawer was empty, all the backup documents we'd kept. A fail-safe in case the digital evidence was compromised. Gone. My jaw clenched. Eli? Had to be. He must have realized he couldn't trace us digitally, so he went old school. A cold wave settled over me. I wasn't naive. I knew Eli was desperate. But this wasn't just corporate gamesmanship anymore. This was personal. He'd crossed the line. Dana met my eyes. We're exposed, Silas. If he finds out where we've stashed the rest, this whole thing could blow back on us. I took a breath, steadying myself. He doesn't know. He's flailing. But even as I said it, I felt the knot tighten in my stomach. The next morning, I walked into the office and found security posted near my desk. Eli's assistant hovered nearby, her eyes darting away when I caught her watching. By noon, Eli called an emergency all-hands meeting. His voice was syrupy smooth as he stood at the front of the room, painting himself as the victim. Recent disruptions, he began, have forced us to conduct a thorough review of our financials. I assure you all, everything is in order. But there are individuals who would rather sow distrust than work for the good of this firm. I felt the eyes turn toward me, and then Eli turned the knife. Effective immediately, Silas Maddox is suspended pending review. We expect full cooperation. Dana shot me a look from across the room, panic simmering beneath her calm exterior. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye, every whispered conversation that had trailed me these past weeks. I met Eli's gaze head on. I'll comply, I said. But you should know, this won't save you. He smiled, thin and brittle. We'll see. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing felt like the loneliest path? Sometimes standing your ground means facing the storm alone, but the right people notice. Suspended or not, I wasn't going to let Eli dictate the final chapter of this story. The moment I stepped outside the office after that all-hands meeting, the cold spring air felt like a slap, a jarring reminder that the fight had only just begun. The next week blurred between tense calls with Evelyn and Jacob, strategy meetings with Dana, and sleepless nights replaying every possible move Eli might make. But it wasn't until Evelyn called me at dawn one morning that the tide began to turn. "Silas, he's panicking," she said, her voice sharper than usual. "He's been calling around, trying to smooth over concerns with the investors, but we're not biting." "Good," I said, but my voice was heavy. "How long do we let him flail?" "As long as we need to," she replied. "But I think it's time we pull the trigger." The trigger. 3 weeks earlier, Dana and I had compiled a dossier: Eli's hidden offshore accounts, the creative bookkeeping, the missing bonuses, the manipulated revenue reports. It was airtight. But I knew releasing it would bring the whole company down, not just Eli. I hesitated. "What about the people left behind?" Jacob chimed in. "We've talked to a few of them. They're ready for new leadership, someone who won't treat them like pawns. You have more allies than you think." I nodded slowly, the weight of what was coming sinking in. "Then let's do it." The release was surgical. No sensational headlines, no anonymous leaks. Evelyn and Jacob arranged a private investor summit, bringing together the largest stakeholders under one roof. Dana and I presented the evidence calmly, methodically, laying out the fraud like a blueprint. The room fell into a stunned silence when Dana pulled up the final slide, a breakdown of the $4.7 million Eli had funneled into shell companies, all under the radar. One investor finally spoke. This is theft." Eli wasn't in the room. He didn't know the meeting was happening, but by the time the investors walked out, his fate was sealed. 2 days later, the board convened an emergency meeting. Evelyn invited me to attend, not as a participant, but as a witness. Eli sat at the head of the table, pale, his bravado stripped away. The accusations were laid bare, the proof undeniable. He tried to spin, to minimize, but no one was buying what he was selling anymore. His voice cracked when he said, "This isn't how we do things here." Evelyn leaned forward. "No, Eli, this is how we do things now." By the end of the meeting, Eli Rawlins was removed as CEO, his shares frozen pending litigation. The company's reputation was in shambles, but the investors were willing to rebuild, with me at the helm. I walked out of that boardroom, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the one we needed. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn and Jacob helped me secure a new leadership position, not at the broken firm Eli had left behind, but at a competitor that absorbed the best of our team. Dana came with me, and together we began building something better, something honest. But the final twist? Eli's house of cards crumbled further. The SEC launched an investigation spurred by investor complaints. His personal assets were seized. The last I heard, he was holed up in a rented condo, waiting for the legal dust to settle. I never reached out, never gloated. Some endings speak for themselves. Sometimes the best revenge is proving them wrong without ever raising your voice. Have you ever had to take the high road to reclaim your worth? I'd love to hear your story. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: your worth is not defined by the people who fail to see it. I spent years believing that loyalty and hard work would be enough. But sometimes those in power mistake kindness for weakness, and they push too far. Rebuilding my life wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about standing firm, knowing my value, and refusing to let someone else write the ending. And maybe that's something you need to hear today too. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below or let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because there's always another story worth telling.